within the Finance Bill 2023. We'll be touching more on that, as well as, like I said earlier when we began the show, it is budget week, and the CS for Treasury, Njuguna Ndung'u, is expected to table the budget estimates before Parliament on Thursday, which is on the 15th of June. However, there are a number of issues we need to look into, and on the very front page of Daily Nation, this is what it captures. Birds of a feather, they say. Ruto following in Uhuru's footsteps. Same script. He vowed to chart his own path during the campaigns, but after just about 9 months in office, the actions and policies of President William Ruto's administration have so far done little to differentiate it from that of his predecessor, Uhuru Kenyatta. It's on full pages 4 and 5. So at a glance, what are they looking at? Failure to meet the two-thirds gender rule. There's the issue of the housing fund, which has created quite a huge debate across the country. Cronyism in state appointments, plans to lease out ports, CAS appointments. You have the issue of entrenching state capture of independent institutions, use of political numerical advantage to bulldoze legislations or proposals, luring opposition MPs to government side, the competence-based curriculum. Let's just have a look at that full report, page 4 to 5 of the Daily Nation. Just see really what it entails. Broken promises, they say, on this report. During the presidential campaigns last year, the head of state often declared that he would take a governance approach starkly different to that of his predecessor. But 9 months later, the similarities stand out. Let me begin with you, Arnold. Do you think, the head of state is taking or has taken over the footsteps of his predecessor Uhuru Kenyatta, and that really he's just reading from Uhuru's playbook, as what the Nation says?
I think probably the headline should have read differently, because the president promised a lot of times that he would pick up the projects and the plan they had started with President Uhuru Kenyatta, and which, according to the president, had been stalled because of the handshake. That is why he actually said a lot of times that we had the big four, we had the housing and everything else. We're no longer doing that. We've concentrated on doing politics. So other than the only issue I have with this, with the president, is the issue on two-thirds. We cannot treat Article 27(8) of the Constitution as a suggestion. It's been around for far too long. And for a population that is slightly over 50% of the country, I think that is something that really needs to be worked out. We cannot be struggling to get two-thirds for when you're doing the PASs, when you're doing the CSS, and when you're doing the appointments. That there is no way of explaining that. Are
you seeing a difference in the governance style of the current head of state compared to the previous regime's leadership? Are you seeing is there a difference?
There are a lot of differences. It's just about how you choose to look at it. First of all, we have got one country. So if we had a housing problem last year and the previous year, and we didn't fix it then, it's not going to go away this year. So first of all, they are ruling the same country called Kenya. And that some of those challenges are, let me not call it endemic to this country, but they are part and parcel of a growing process. And when you are into governance, and even if you're doing policy, you realize that sometimes it's continuous. It faces into a different end. Though a number of things, like I said, the issue of gender is quite a big issue. I don't know why we don't treat it like it's something that we really need to speak out on. Okay. Not just speak out on, but to act. You see, the same way the president is acting when it comes to corruption, it should be easy when it comes to gender, because they also lift the heavy burden. Let's talk about votes. Women voted in their numbers. So we shouldn't really have excuses and explanations on why we can bring in women. Right. On the housing fund thing, both Azimio and Kenya Kwanza had it in their manifesto, so we would have seen it this way anyway. Plans to lease ports is as old as Vision 2030. It's not Uhuru specific. It was in the Vision 2030. I was an ambassador, a youth ambassador for Vision 2030. I'm now getting old, so I still remember these things. CS appointments, of course, this is Uhuru specific. But then we are struggling as a country with an echo from the past where we used to have assistant ministers. And all of a sudden we realized that the people who sat in Bomas and Naivasha and came up with the new constitution really didn't also factor in the other political aspect. Because if you don't fix politics, however good you are in economics and any other thing, you will struggle to govern. And you've seen a lot of governors out there, and even sometimes when President Uhuru Kenyatta was struggling to get legitimacy, it's important sometimes to bring some people on board. If I know a guy who will give me problems when I'm actually ruling, I will have to manage ways, first of all. Otherwise, I will not have time to actually sit here and even talk. So that's what it is.
All right.
Entrenching state capture, I think it's too early. 9 months into the administration, it will be too early until we start getting, and you people will know when they start getting calls and you're being told this is how you do it, this is how you go about it. Really,
but there were questions that were raised, at least from the opposition, on this particular matter when you have, the DPP dropping that's one case of instance of what they termed as state capture. Right?
Zainab, just because it has happened in the past, sometimes we are human beings.
But essentially you say there's a difference, and you're seeing a difference in terms of... All right, let's hear from...
Yeah, so just a moment so that I might not be able to come back to this.
All right.
We are yet to see bulldozing legislation coming in. The way we saw it, and we were being told, no, forget these are the guys who are shouting in FinRolls and on Twitter that it will pass, a comma will not be done. There are so many changes that are happening. So forget Osoro shouting out there. He has got a right to shout. That is his constitutional right. But then that is essentially not something we've seen here. CBC, all of us want to move to the future of work. And if we don't pick this up, unfortunately, we will really struggle to actually have a workforce that can meet the future.
All right.
Yeah.
Very quickly, Nurdin, I want to hear your thoughts. At least just looking at this particular report, 9 months in office, President William Ruto's administration's actions doing little to differentiate it from the previous regime. Is that something that you from where you sit is happening in terms of the governance path that the president is taking compared to the previous administration?
They say the way things change, the same way they remain the same. And we're always told that the play is the same, the forest is the same, the monkeys are... Sorry, the forests are different, but the monkeys are the same. Now, if you look at the points highlighted on the daily paper, the only things that you can talk about continuity of government are CBC and that list of the ports under Vision 2030. Now, if you come back to the other things like failure to meet two-thirds, yes, he's walking the footsteps of his predecessor, because the appointments he made in the ministries, the appointments he made in the PS level, even in the CAS, don't fit the two-thirds gender rule. Now, if you look at, for example, the housing fund, let me look at it in a broader way. Let's call it the finance bill, how it's being pushed. We've seen the chest thumping, we've seen the upendo usipende kind of the way the BBI was being pushed, courtesy of the former administration. So the bravado is there. That's an example of how it's following in the former's footsteps. If you look at, for example, the chronism, as you're saying, in state appointments, it is true. And we were told this country is for shareholders. Those who voted with them will get appointments. And you can see, if, for example, look at the PSs. You have like 27 from 2 communities, for example. You look at, for example, those who get appointment are those who are closer to them. Proximity to power, that's what we're talking about. If you look at the CAS appointments, we really didn't need them. But because you have to make those who are closer to you feel like you toil together, you suffer together, the same way Uhuru was unable to cater for them, and he is doing the same thing by giving them a soft landing. The issue on state capture, in as much as we might sit here and act like we are blind, it is true. It is there. And that is why we keep saying we're waiting for that commission that was promised to Kenyans during campaigns for it to ever come up. Issues of the legislature. Allow me to say this, but our parliament is dead, and the burial will be after we vote for this finance bill. There is no parliament there. When you look at the 2 speakers of the both houses, they look like there's someone who talks to them before they make decisions. Look at the issues of leader of, look at the minority, for example, the whip. Look at how Tamala cannot even make a decision. Look at how it was strenuous for Kingi to make a decision in Senate. It tells you there is something behind that. Look at the statements the president made, I think last weekend, on matters of voting. It's like he's directing the National Assembly how it's meant to vote. So it tells you it is captured in as much...
really captured when you look at Taifa Leo, for example, because you've talked about that and the issue of the autonomy of Parliament on its own. Yeah. This is the Speaker of the National Assembly, and on Taifa Leo it says, Puuzeni Ruto na Raila. That's what Wetangula is saying. Speaker ashauri wabunge wakatae vitisho vya viongozi wa vyama vyao na watumie hekima kupiga kura bungeni. Don't you find the truth in this particular statement from the speaker?
That's double speak, because if he did so, his actions would speak louder than the words he's making. Because at the end of the day, it shows that he himself as a person, if you look at how he carries himself, you can clearly see where he lies in his decision making most of the time. Because I do follow that house. And you see the chaotic scenes that we saw the other day where an iPhone was stolen, as we were told, courtesy of the fact that someone went and got a certain court order. It tells you how Parliament is being run. That's why I'm telling you, Parliament is dead, and that's why we are being told government never loses. So we're wondering, who is the government fight? Is it the people at the end of the day? So we're waiting to see how they will vote, but we all know, because they have gotten back to the tyranny of number that Uhuru had, courtesy of luring, be it the Jubilee members, the independent members, and also those called renegade or rebel leaders in ODM.
Okay, let's hear from Hesbon Owila, who now joins us as well in studio, media and political communications expert. A very good morning, Hesbon. Good to see you. And also joining us this morning is Peter Mushendo, who is a political and data analyst. A very good morning. Thank you for joining us. But let me hear from Hesbon first. So we were just actually touching on this particular report here by Daily Nation, captured on the very front page. Ruto following in Uhuru's footsteps. They've taken at a glance just a number of issues there. I think you can see it on the paper. Same script, they say. He vowed to chart his own path, but just about 9 months in office, it appears that the president has done little to differentiate his leadership from that of his predecessor, Uhuru Kenyatta. Do you agree with this particular issue?
Well, I think to some extent, there's no president who can just depart, from his or her predecessor.
Immediately right after he takes over office.
Yeah, and in fact, even if they were to do 10 years, I don't think they would depart completely, simply because as a country, we face the same challenges. It is a challenge of, poverty. I mean, all presidents will have to deal with that. I think housing, Arnold has eloquently put it, even Azimio had in their manifesto, the issue of housing and a number of other things. But you can certainly say that there are certain things that we didn't like in President Uhuru's administration that we are seeing in President Ruto's administration. And I think that's where most of us, draw the line, that if he was to chart his own path, then we expected him to chart his path along issues that we didn't find interesting in Uhuru's administration. But the things that work for Kenyans, you can't depart from something that was working and chart your own path. You don't change a winning team. And there are certain things that will always be there. Once there's a new sheriff in town as a president, I think, a certain clique of powerful individuals will definitely, come into the fore to protect the presidency. For the simple reason that, once you are president, you need to be focused on running the country. So the side shows and the distractions, there'll be people who will be handling that. And, that is how the whole idea of state capture, comes in. And there are so many interpretations of state capture, by the way. In a representative and liberal democracy like ours, the idea is that the state is independent, that when power is transferred from one person to another, the state doesn't do anything. But you see, the idea of the deep state came in when the state now assumes that it is not taking part in the political process, but then there is a deeper layer, that through machinations and all other, ways of ensuring that there is continuity and smooth continuity, they influence what is happening. But I would say that, we expected a lot more. The reason why Kenyans expected a complete departure from what we've seen in the previous regimes is the way this government campaigned. They campaigned on a totally different
Do you think there's over-expectation from Kenyans on this particular regime?
Well, I don't think there is over-expectations as such. It's only that Kenyans will suffer some sense of disillusionment. Some are already doing that simply because there was over-promise. We had a campaign period that was characterized by too much promises. On the one hand, we had Azimio that promised 6,000, welfare fund. And then I think the Kenya Kwanza tendered almost everything. They had money for almost everything, for Mama, for Vijana, and all that. So there was a lot of promise. But now reality has checked in that most of the things that they promised for them to actually fulfill some of those things, they have to raise a lot of money. And I think that is what has brought us to the finance bill. And even if we were to say that there is complete independence, you know, and I like what Nurdin has said, certainly it doesn't matter what you know, the Speaker of the National Assembly says, you know, he's a principal in Kenya Kwanza, you know. So he has to distinguish himself, not in statements, but in actions, you know. There are people who are still asking themselves what happened with the ruling on the majority and the minority in Parliament, and to what extent was that, you know, rooted within the pressings of the law. Then you look at the Sabina Chege issue. I mean, he made so many rulings, and I think right now we are in a state of limbo. We don't even know what to expect from the Speaker of the National Assembly anymore. So you can actually say that a lot of things will be seen from the lenses of the executive influencing even what is happening in Parliament, not just because they have numbers, but simply because the two speakers, both of the Senate and the National Assembly, are technically principals in Kenya Kwanza.
But this is the same script that was there in the previous regime as well. So you're basically
No, it is different, because in the previous regime, J.B. Muturi was not a principal. He was not. Neither was Lusaka. They were not principals.
But remember, Jubilee had a majority of members, and
they were members. You see, they were members
of the numerical
which is
strength
different.
they had in the National Assembly.
Yes, they were members of Jubilee, which is different, yeah. But in this case, we are talking about principals. You know, folks who are, for all intent and purposes, presidential candidates. So you see, the threshold for them to distinguish themselves as heading independent arms of the government is fairly high.
Let's hear from Peter. Do you think the president is reading from the same playbook?
I think I'll start with what he has ended up with, talking about Justin Muturi and Lusaka. I think it's even more dangerous that Justin Muturi has been drinking Baji and a long-time friend of Uhuru Kenyatta. This now goes beyond the politics of coalition. It was very personal. Because let me tell you,
was it?
Well, you know. But if you are talking about political principles, I mean, if you are talking about political principles like Wetangula and whoever, they came together in Kenya Kwanza because their ideas were heading to the same direction. On the case of J.B. Muturi, who was picked out of this set holding nobody's possession in Kenya, and he was made speaker for 10 years. Let me tell you, Kenyan politics is capital politics. We have a capital economy, and the way we practice our politics will remain the same. When the Honorable Mwai Kibaki took power, there are people who are very powerful people in that government, the likes of Professor Nicky Wanjoi. When he left and Uhuru came, he also found what you call normally a kitchen cabinet, because that's basically how our political plays. And I do not have a problem, and I don't see a problem if the Speaker of the National Assembly or the Speaker of the Senate belongs to a certain political party.
But that's an independent government arm of the government,
let me
right?
tell you, if you look at and study at the rules of democracy anywhere in the world, every National Assembly or every House of Parliament is controlled by a certain political function. That is not something that is not normal. Go to the US, who is the Speaker of the House of Representatives, Nancy Pelosi, a non-Democrat over the years. Go to Britain, who is the Speaker of the British Parliament.
But then the question of the separation of powers does kick in on this.
You see, let me tell you, let me tell you, Article 1 of the Constitution confers the authority of the Constitution to the people, goes ahead to say that they may exercise it directly or indirectly through the elected leaders. In this case, as Kenyans, we elected members of parliament, we elected the senators, who in turn went to parliament and exercised that right on our behalf and elected a speaker through the secret ballot. And therefore, when you want to talk about the independent institution in Kenya, there is a very thin line. Let me give you an example. The Judicial Service Commission recommended some judges to be appointed in the previous regime. And you know, if you read our constitution, for those who are lawyers, they say that the supreme organ of that has been mandated to employ judges is the Judicial Service Commission. But who vetoed that appointment? It is the president, who refused to appoint the judges that were appointed by Ruto immediately. Now that tells you, If we really want to define a very clear line between independent institution and infiltration by government, we have to do better in our laws, because then you ask yourself, why would the president veto what the Judicial Service Commission has they advertised? People applied, they interviewed, they shortlisted again, and they come up with a list, and they said, we have looked at these people. They are now qualified to be judges of the High Court, judges of the Court of Appeal, judges of the Supreme Court. But the president, in his own wisdom or lack of it, he decided he will not appoint these people. Then,
let me ask you this.
Yes.
Do you think then the current president is chartering a different path from what was happening in the previous regime? Are you seeing a difference there?
I think I will agree with my brother here. It is absurd to expect that a new president will come and change an institution that is, we are how many years old? 60 years old since independent. You cannot wake up one day and tomorrow change how things are done, which have been done for 60 years. If you want to take, because what path did this government use to get to power?
Okay.
They used the same path other governments have got, the same campaign, the same way, they appoint people the same way. So if you want to see change, I do not think anybody who sees politics in Kenya the way they are done would expect that Ruto will come in today and tomorrow do a lot of changes. But then there is also a challenge to this government that we made quite a hefty number of promises to the people.
So the expectations are high?
And the expectations, I will not say there is over expectations, but they are high. So this government has a challenge of living up to the very promises that they made to people. And I think for me that would be the problem right now, that people are expecting probably something magical, that immediately you get to power, you start implementing the things that you said you will do. Now, when the people don't see that, there is that agitation that we want to see, what did you promise? Are you doing it? So I think we are in that quagmire where people have this expectation and government has done this law. So that's the problem currently. And
when we come back, we'll have a discussion on the issue of the finance bill, because that has certainly created quite a huge debate in the country. And like you say, is it over expectation, or there are actually legitimate concerns, and the politics around those particular concerns? We know we have to take a break, but we do have other stories also making headlines in the dailies. Let me just quickly take a look at those as well. Traders protest at Kenya's ban on milk imports from Uganda. That's traders from the Central Rift and parts of Western region were condemning the Kenya Dairy Board's ban of milk imports from Uganda. The traders were until March stocked mostly long-life milk imported from Uganda, say the impasse had affected their profits amid huge demand for Ugandan milk among their consumers. So that's a particular row that is happening right now with regard to the dairy industry in Kenya. It's on the second page of the Daily Nation. And what else do we have? The hits and misses of the Boys to Men concert, which happened on Saturday evening. And it says, there's a Swahili saying, Mgala muwe, lakini haki yake lazima umpe, which loosely translates to give praise where it's due and criticism where it's necessary. And of course, Thomas Rajula goes on to explain really what happened. Some who were not very happy with the performance, or is it not really the performance, but some of the hiccups that happened during this particular festival. And of course, those who are happy when you are in the VVIP, I'm sure men who said were in the VIP and VVIP sections were enjoyed their night, but those who were on the regular tickets side, really it was quite a challenge for them. And of course, it continued. Yeah, Husband, were you there at the concert? Are you a fan of
I was
there. You wish you did.
The moment you hear there is VVIP ticket in a concert,
right,
don't buy the normal ticket. It's as simple as that.
It's as simple as that. All right.
Yeah.
Okay, anyway, so what else do you have? So this is what we had just discussed. And Odwall's fate now in senators' hands as ouster papers filed. A showdown is looming at the Senate after a resolution of the impeachment of CI Deputy Governor William Odwall was filed on Saturday. Now, this battle is likely to take a political twist after CI Senator Uhuru Oginga on Saturday sensationally claimed there were plans by senators from President William Ruto's Kenya Kwanza alliance to defend the embattled deputy governor. Oginga says while addressing a funeral in Bondo, that's in Siaya County, where he was accompanied by Governor James Orengo, alleged that the majority side could save Oduol, but warned that the move could dim his political career. So this is another issue that is happening. MPs are set to deliberate on the Deputy Governor's impeachment by County Assembly members. It is a political, turmoil, or is it a showdown that we do expect to see, and it has been happening for quite some time in Siaya. So that's one other aspect we'll be keeping an eye on as well. And also, school heads unhappy as ministry releases 24 billion shillings. The Ministry of Education has released 24 billion in capitation funds to primary and secondary schools, with warnings to principals against sending students home for not paying school fees. The amount is 4 billion short of what Education Cabinet Secretary Ezekiel Mishogo had promised to send to schools a week ago. This coming amid reports that the schools had started sending learners home to collect school fees following the delayed disbursement of the funds. However, the Cabinet Secretary said that despite the delay, 85% of parents had paid school fees. That's on the education sector there. You can get that full report on page 7 of the Daily Nation. Also, just adjacent to that report, electricity producers seek an end to Kenya Power's stranglehold. Independent power producers want Parliament to review Kenya Power operational efficiencies and ensure an overall reduction in power theft. The Electricity Sector Association of Kenya told lawmakers to enact reforms that will encourage more competition in the generation, transmission and support services in power generation. And then what else do we have here? Let me just also leave it here at the Business Daily, because we'll come back and make a quick comment on this. CBK boss who tamed rogue banks but lost fight to save the shilling. That's the face there of the CBK Governor Patrick Njoroge, and it talks about his term and tenure in at the helm of the Central Bank of Kenya. Patrick Njoroge is expected to hand over office of the Governor of the Central Bank of Kenya to Kamau Thuge this week, leaving behind a legacy of a tough regulator who was not afraid of speaking truth to power. 8 years ago, during his vetting before Parliament, many people, including members of Parliament, would have been forgiven for thinking that the soft-spoken economist would be an easy customer. Today, few hold this opinion after taking stock of his tough regulatory stance on banks and digital lenders during his term at the helm of the CBK. When we come back, we'll just do a quick review of the governor's performance. 8 years in office. Let's take a quick break here on M Live. We're going to be back in a short while. The hashtag is M Live NTV.